In this video, I want to talk about triggers, specifically emotional triggers, and why emotional triggers are actually not a bad thing. They're actually a good thing. They're really helpful. And actually, any idea of trying to get rid of triggers will probably be counterintuitive to your personal growth, your development, and your ability to just be all round a better human being. But first, I want to kind of illustrate this by telling you a story. I've had just yesterday, I've had a couple of quite active triggers that have shown up in my life. So it feels appropriate to share it in this video because some of these videos I'm sharing kind of historical information, things where maybe I've healed or have started to heal or started to deactivate triggers. But these triggers I'm going to speak about, this is kind of a bit edgy for me because these triggers I'm going to speak about are very, very much still active. The first one was around a posting of one of my videos in a WhatsApp group that I'm in, which I've been posting a few in a particular WhatsApp group I'm in. And I had been starting to notice that there was a particular individual that had been commenting in a way that was kind of the opposite of what I would want, right? So he was not being critical, but he was putting comments that weren't necessarily supportive. And I noticed myself feeling internally triggered a few times. And then finally yesterday, I was externally triggered and I commented and I kind of said some kind of verbal garbage back, kind of defending myself and defending the video and basically saying, if you're not going to be supportive, then, you know, what are you here for? And this kind of stuff. And so what was really powerful for me about that was, without mentioning names of this individual, was I was very quickly able to recognize that I'd been triggered. I was very quickly able to recognize that, you know, there was definitely an apology on my part that needed to be given. Because one of the things I've learned about apologizing is even if you feel like you don't owe a person an apology, if it's sincere, is just healthy. Like, as in, I truly believe that anytime I apologize, even if I feel that I don't need to, right? It's not for me to apologize. It's like I'm deflating the ego. And so, because the ego loves to be right. And the problem is, well, the problem for the ego is if you say sorry, if you apologize and it's meaningful and you're not just saying it for the sake, not like, sorry, but like if you really mean it, the ego hates that. So in actual fact, saying sorry is a great way for you to kind of deflate the ego. And the ego, like I said, is very much a protective shield that wants to be right. The problem with being right, because a lot of people say, well, what's wrong with being right if I am right? Here's the problem with being right. As human beings, we don't live by ourselves. As human beings, we rely on other people to coexist. And so anytime we are triggered by another human being, it's like it sends a message to the universe that we are unable to be unconditionally loving to another human being. Like we are basically, and just so you know, just to kind of add to this, I am all for spending more time with people who are more like you. I am all for spending more time with people who tell you you're great. But the problem with that is it's just a way of inflating the ego. In actual fact, it doesn't necessarily give you growth. So it may seem idealistic to spend all your time with people that are your kind of people. But it's likely that if they're your kind of people, they're going to say what you want them to say, and therefore they're not going to reflect back where there's areas for you to grow and improve. So this particular person reflected back to me that there was still a trigger inside of me that still, and I've spoke about this in my videos before, and I've made it explicitly clear that I've had a desperate need for the majority of my adult life for the need for approval and validation, because I didn't get a lot of that as a child. My dad wasn't there. My mum was I'd say emotionally unavailable a lot of the time, especially as a teenager. I love my mum, but she had a tough childhood herself, right? Without going into the details of that. But she didn't get given the manual because there isn't one. And I've not got the manual for my children and so on, right? But the point here I'm making is this isn't about any other individual. This is about recognizing that if we are being triggered by another human being, the point of this video is to talk about that something inside of you, there's somewhere where the universe or God or whoever you kind of say is up there is sending you a signal to tell you to pay attention to something. So the beauty of a trigger is it's really like it's like a warning light on a dashboard of a car. Like the beauty of a trigger is if somebody triggers you, if you get angry or frustrated or annoyed by somebody, that's like a warning light on the dashboard of a car telling you that there's a problem, that it's something you need to pay attention to. Because if you ignore that trigger, you ignore that dashboard indicator, eventually something's going to happen and the car may break down, and then you can complain as much as you like. The indicator was there maybe for a long time, right? So being triggered is good. And then a second one yesterday, closer to home, was with my mum, who her and I have had a challenging relationship probably since I was a child. We're very different. I would say that actually the reason why I'm in this coaching world, in this personal growth paradigm, is I'm blessed by it, because I probably wouldn't be here if I'd had this perfect childhood. But we're very different. And where I was triggered yesterday, interestingly enough, and this I was very triggered by this one because it was someone so close to me, was my mum had heard, I think through somebody else, kind of Chinese whispers. Apparently I'd recorded a video, and apparently in the video I'd badmouthed my mum and told her she was a bad mum, right? Which I didn't do, and I haven't done in any of my videos and never would. But instead what I do is I often talk about childhood, and I talk about things that perhaps she would feel are private, or that she wouldn't want to talk about. And I only ever disclose things that are to do with me, and obviously my mum's an extension of that, right? But the point being is that where I was triggered was that my mum had seen it as appropriate to kind of text my wife, Sati, to say, is this true? Has Miles been doing this? It's apparently on YouTube. Rather than kind of checking it out for herself and seeing if I'd actually said something. Anyway, my point being is this really triggered me. And I basically went into a story of, mum further not, kind of approving of me and not validating my work, and, not paying attention to what I do, not listening to what I do, and not being interested. And I just ran this whole story, completely blew it up. And then I kind of went on a bit of a rant where I kind of texted my mum and said, this is how I felt. And, if you watched it yourself, you'd know that I'd never say that. And then I sent it to her. And I just went into this spiral of just like triggers. But like I said, the beautiful thing about this, about being triggered, is when you're aware, this is the thing I've learned about triggers, is from my experience, we will never fully deactivate all our triggers. And that's not your fault. If you're watching this video, I just want you to know that if you are triggered, if you find yourself needing something from another person, they don't give it you, or somebody says something to you and it displeases you, just know that your first response is not your fault. The key is to be aware, and the key is what happens with your second response. So your second response is when you become aware and you awaken from this unconscious pain body coma. When you wake up from that you become aware that you are in that unconscious pattern, and that you then make a conscious decision to do something about it. Whether that is initially an apology, whether that is, if that feels right, whether that is that you go, I'm getting triggered, maybe I need to do something about this. Because 90% of the issue is aware. 90% of what am I trying to say? 90% of the battle is awareness. So once you've kind of got the awareness bit, the 10% is then doing the work to really unearth where the trigger comes from, so that you have the most likely chance of deactivating that trigger. So I have the awareness, and now I recognize that the 10% is to continue doing the work that I'm doing. Continue the work that I'm doing with the inner child coach, to continue the shadow work that I'm doing, to continue the men's group therapy that I'm in, right? And it's to continue on this path of raising my awareness and reflecting a mirror to the areas where I'm perhaps not necessarily being the version of me that I want to ideally be as a husband, as a man, as a father, as a coach, as a dad, as a son, and shine a light on that. And just keep every time I'm triggered going, okay, what's the lesson? How do I need to respond better? I'm triggered again, what's the lesson? I'm triggered again, what's the lesson? I've been triggered again, what's the lesson? And it's really important that when you're triggered, that you recognize and remember it is not your fault. The worst thing you can do is blame yourself. Feeling guilt is one thing. Like, guilt is fine, shame is bad. Like Brene Brown talks about this a lot, right? It's fine to be guilty. Like, if you do something that's not nice just towards somebody else, being guilty is fine. Feeling shame is not fine. Because when you feel shame, you're harming your inner child. Feeling guilt is taking responsibility as an adult, that you're an adult, and in that moment, as an adult, you should take responsibility for the consequence. There should be consequences for what you've said. But you shouldn't then internally beat yourself up, because if you internally beat yourself up, you're actually internally beating up your inner child. And that's why it will affect your self-esteem and your self-worth. Am I saying that you should have no remorse whatsoever? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, apologize, but then forgive yourself, and then let it go and move on and recognize that everybody makes mistakes, and that nobody is superhuman. Nobody is immune to making mistakes. And just remember, like, especially if you're in this world of coaching, that, you know, as a coaching kind of friend, mentor, Rich Litvin used to say, you can only take a client as deep as you've been yourself. So the more work you do on yourself, the deeper you go on yourself, then the deeper you can take your client, which means the more likely you are to create the long-term breakthroughs that your clients, which is ultimately my assumption as to why you're really here, is that you want to create breakthroughs in your coaching, in your body of work that helps other people. And the best way to do that is to keep having breakthroughs within yourself. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I'd love to know in the comments below, what have you got from this one? And maybe message me privately. Let me know where you've recently been triggered. What could you do about that trigger? What work needs to be done? What are you committed to doing? What work are you already doing? If you're not doing any, what work could you recommend? Happy to share resources and things that I recommend that I'm doing on my journey. And just to fully kind of clarify at the end of this video, I'm not perfect. I'm just here on the path with you, doing this work. That's it from me. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Take care. Goodbye.